Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everyone to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the 4th of October 2022. Before we start the meeting properly, I would like to read out the emergency evacuation announcement. There are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm activates, please leave the building in an orderly fashion via your nearest fire exit. The two fire exits through the partition doors are currently not in use due to ongoing works. Therefore, the fire exits are through the main doors of the hall or the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the roundabout stroke island in the front of the main entrance to this building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that this meeting will be audio recorded. Would you please switch off your mobiles or turn them to silent? Toilets and hand washing facilities are available in the foyer area. Members, there is a need to use microphones during this meeting. When I invite you to speak, please wait until there is a microphone in front of you before speaking, as the microphones are needed for the hearing loop and for the audio recording. These are all switched on and are ready for you to speak, so you do not need to adjust them. Thank you. Please make sure that the microphone is directly in front of you when speaking, as it won't pick up your voice. And members, voting will be done on a show of hands in line with the Constitution. I'll ask for a show of hands for and then against recommendations. And I'll also ask for a show of hands for those wishing to abstain from voting. So moving on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Richard Lambourne and Councillor John Mason. Agenda item 2, substitute members attending. Councillor Mrs Wilson, welcome. Agenda item 3, non-members attending. We've got Councillor Simon Wootton, Councillor Arthur Williams, Councillor Mike Webb, Councillor Cheryl Rowe, Councillor Daniel Lefday and Councillor Chris Stanley. So welcome all. And I'd also like to welcome members of the public as well. Moving on to agenda item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July 2022. Are these minutes agreed, members?
Agreed, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Those are agreed. Agenda item 5, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, members?
No one's indicated.
Okay, there are none. Thank you. So we now move on to agenda item 6, which is the One Team Transformation Programme, the strategic partnership with Brentwood Borough Council, and it's a Q3 update. And I'll now ask the Council's Director of Policy and Delivery, Greg Campbell, to introduce the report, please. Greg.
Is that correct? Thank you, Chair. First of all, good evening, members. I'm Greg Campbell, Director of Policy and Delivery. I think it's the first time I've seen many of you and probably the first time you've seen me. So just want to say hello, and I'm sure that we'll have conversations in the near future and get to know each other a bit better as time moves forward. Just give an overview of the report that we've got before us, because there's a couple of updates to give that you may be aware of already. But obviously the directors' interviews that were outstanding, the 5, they've taken place, and 2 other directors have been appointed. Phoebe Barnes to Asset and Investment, and Sarah Bennett to Customer and Data Insight. That leaves outstanding a director needing to be appointed to People and Governance and a director to Resources. The other director at the moment for Housing is actually an interim contractor, Julian Hodgson, who's undertaking that role at the present time. Obviously, we'll be going out in the near future to re-employ to those positions as soon as we can. What that leads me on to is obviously how they're going to be looked after in those positions in the near future. So there are discussions at the moment happening to make sure that there is that continuation of service at the moment, making sure that those voids are filled and making sure that there is no lapse in service as that happens. So those conversations are going on. What this also leads to is the financial position. Obviously, this may impact the bottom line at the very end, and you'll note that obviously where we're keeping people on, where we haven't employed, it may impact the financial position towards the end, and there may be a slight cost pressure. I do not know exactly what that is at the moment. I've been talking to the financial director, and there will be an update, I believe, in the next quarter. What I can say is, obviously, in the report, you'll note 4.2 says there is no pressure. Obviously, because of those positions, there will be a slight pressure, but what I can't do is actually tell you what that is at this time. I would like to finish, though, just to update you really on some of the positives that we've been having. We've been having meetings with the key change champions, with the managers of both Brentwood and Rochford. We've been moving and progressing that work over the last couple of months, and we're now ready to bring together that roadmap and start the service reviews at the end of this month, and therefore we'll be able to put them through and then start making changes towards the end and the start of the new year. That's my update for this evening, Chair. Happy for obviously any questions.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Members, anyone have any questions for Greg on the report? Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of practical things, if I may. During the transition, one of the things that we're finding very frustrating is the fact that we are dealing with people who we don't know. A couple of practical suggestions on that. I know that the chairman has offered to host a meeting for members to attend and meet the new members of the new officers of the council. I'd like to see that actioned if possible, please. The other thing is, while we're going through this transition, it would help me in particular if when we have a signature at the end of the reports that it's actually followed underneath by the typed name, because at the moment we are not familiar with who's who, so I just see a signature there. I've got no idea who it is. So just a couple of practical things would be very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that?
Absolutely. As I said at the start, I would like to get to know all of you. So if that opportunity is there, great, fantastic. And if something happens, I can make sure I'm available to meet you at a point. We can put that in the diary and do that. Not a problem at all. And yeah, it's just obviously, as you point out, it would be good to have the name under a signatory. Signatures aren't the best sometimes at reading anyway, so definitely would be worth having it printed. Point taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Gooding.
Good evening, Greg.
Evening.
It might be me, and if it is, I apologise. Points 3.16 and 3.18, on reading through them, they do appear to perhaps contradict themselves. Are you just able to clarify those 2 points for us?
3.16 and 3.18, was it?
Yeah.
So the ICT, this relates to both the ICT. So 3.16 is about ICT working with facilities management, HR across the board, identifying some of the more practical issues that need to be sorted. Very basic things that may fall outside of service reviews, a bit like key fobs to get into both areas. Ways of working, some of the more simplistic, but they could fall off the radar if they're not picked up. So that's a piece of work that's happening there. The other part, I think, is more the ICT review. And that is more very much based in what ICT are doing, standardising equipment across both boards. So that's being picked up because it's purely an IT thing. But some of the other stuff is more the practicalities that if we don't keep an eye on, I wouldn't say fall through the cracks, but it may just get pushed. But I want to make sure we capture them early, and therefore we make sure that we deal with them as we move along.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gadsden. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mr Newport. You were first.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Greg. And in this report, it refers to the Section 113 document that I made a request to the CEO on the 15th of September to have a copy sent to me, which he then duly delegated to you to send to me, which I still haven't received. Which leads me on to a question. regarding the ICT. In your opinion, does the teams at Rochford and Brentwood have the skill set in order to complete this piece of work? Because I've been waiting for a significant amount of time for some basic administration tasks to be carried out by both teams, and that administration task is simply to share a calendar of the CEO and other directors, and we're still not at a point where they can deliver that. To me, as an IT professional, performing that basic function, that basic administration task, I find it very hard to believe that we don't have the skills to complete that. So is there a risk to the project or the transformation in the capabilities of your ICT team?
Thank you, Councillor Newport. I'll take the first part. I apologise if I haven't provided you with this section 113. I'll make sure that happens as soon as I'm back in the office tomorrow to organise that, so you can have that. There's no problem there. I'm sorry about that. With regard to the specific problem, I don't know about that right now, so I can find out why that has been a problem. And you've said you've been asking it for some time. I'll find out what the delay is and I'll come back to you. With regards to the teams, and I've met both ICT teams, I'm confident in their ability. Obviously, there are things that are going to come up that will be challenging, and it's about how we meet those challenges head on. But the people that I have met and worked with in the past from both groups, they give me confidence in what their ability is. It depends on some of the challenges. As we know, we're looking at merging services together. That will throw up all sorts of challenges. We may need some different experts to bring into the organisation to deliver some of those aspects of what that merge or bringing the teams together may be. But I'm confident with when I've spoken to them on their abilities. But obviously, once we've done the service review of ICT and what that needs to be moving forward, because it may be a different animal then.
Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
I'm just a bit concerned in the migration. Obviously, you've got a migration plan, that those risks haven't already been identified before you get there, as to whether you have got the skill set in-house. Because as we well know, within Rochford Council, certainly, we've been caught out by this before, and it's ended up costing the council a lot of money. And the chairman will actually verify that, because we were both in a meeting about transformation previously.
Yeah.
So I assume there is a project plan, and that transformation programme for ICT specifically, are those risks going to be identified ahead, or are we just going to wait until we stumble upon those problems and then say, oh, we can't do that, we're going to need a consultant, and that's going to cost us a lot of money? And I think that is, to me, what you're telling me now, that's where you're at now. And I think that you need to take a step back and actually put together a proper transformation plan for ICT specifically.
Yes, Councillor Newport. Two things there. I will look at the risk on the resources. I do know that ICT are, I think it's mentioned in the report, I believe, are looking at the risks at the start of phase 2, and I'll make sure that that is taken into account and make sure that the resources are there and to scrutinise that. In terms of, I suppose, you take it two ways. One, having the skills that we have right now to deal with what we know, but of course, when the services start undertaking their reviews, there are some unknowns there about what that may look like in the future, and therefore I can't answer all the questions on the skills that we may need in a few months or a year's time. So we can only work on what we know at the moment and what's coming out. But as soon as we're aware of those, and as part of the service review, if there is going to be a change in course in what the programme may be needed to be delivered, or what the platform is going to be used, and we need to get some experts in, we will make sure we bring that in and resource that.
Okay.
Sorry, and did I miss about transformation plan for the ICT?
Yeah, so we have a general transformation plan, then there's the service reviews, which we've got a roadmap to have, and part of that ICT is included within that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Gadsden.
Good evening.
Evening.
I've got a question around 3.8 and the S111, the S113 agreement on page 6.2. I gather that's now complete, the work on that's complete. I'd be quite interested to know whether the committee will get to view that. I gather you're going to update the Constitution, and I was wondering if we're getting to see that before the Constitution's update, or will it be afterwards?
The 113 is now complete. You can have sight of that 113.
Yes, I'd very much like that. I think
Yeah.
probably other members would as well. And my second question for you is around how the improvements to the services between the partnership will be measured. I'm not quite certain of the baselines, or do you have baselines in both councils that you can use to measure improvements for residents, and how often will that be updated for the review committee or of councillors to see?
Thank you. So there are obviously, sorry, Chair, the 113, through you, I will make sure that gets circulated to members. With regards the baseline, they're already, as we know, you measure performance, so there are those baselines already in place. However, moving forward, when we start the service reviews, it'll be important that we do know what the baseline is that we're starting on. So as part of that work, baselines are taken, and then we move forward on what those are. We'll then set what our objectives are, and there may be new performance measures that we need to be put in place. But rest assured that the baseline will be taken into account when the original service reviews are undertaken.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Milne.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. My question is really, it's about risk assessment and the engagement with the committee, because this is a complex set of multiple work streams, and it has got, in R7, in the appendix, the two issues at the bottom there, which are lack of engagement and understanding of the programme, and another issue is impact of Tier 3 review and vacant posts. So has a higher score. Now, this reflects, actually, this is a complex programme with many work streams, so the engagement with this committee, my sort of question would be, of the methodology, really, of the overview, in that we have a SMART objectives schedule, so we can say what we perceive the problem to be, what's going on with it, how's it going to be resolved, and where we're at, because otherwise this is quite a piece of work, this. And, you know, it's quite impressive for both sides, you know, that have dealt with it. And just to make sure we get it right, and there aren't any issues that slip by, like the ICT. And I know there's an awareness of this, but there's a resourcing issue with the risk on it. And there's an understanding of the whole thing, which has got a risk issue with it. So my question really goes back to the Chair. Do you see it doing it that way? As we see it through, as it were.
Well, I'll throw it back to you, Councillor Milne. Have you got a recommendation that you...
Yeah, well, I recommend we deal with it that way, because then we're not going to miss anything, are we? And we're going to deal with it properly. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, if you can...
Do you want me to write it up and ping it over on an email or something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. It's with regard to paragraph 4.1 and the temporary staff. Let's be honest, temporary staff are usually expensive. You've already touched that there is going to be a slight cost pressure. Your concept of slight might be different to our concept of slight. So if we could have some finances produced to demonstrate the cost that's been incurred. And on that, have we not looked at our existing staff, and can they be upskilled for these roles?
So I can't really comment on the existing staff because I haven't been involved in that process and the upskilling of those staff. What I can say is obviously we will see sight of the finances and the pressures every time we report back anyway, and I believe there is a budget report coming back to Rochford Council at some point in the near future anyway, which will take account of the pressure that's being put on there. So it's difficult for me to say about the staff that have gone through the process and upskilling them from the position that I sit at the moment. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Chairman, could I make a recommendation that we do investigate that as an option, possibly investigating if we can upskill any existing staff to be able to apply for those roles? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Constable.
Thank you, Chairman. It's on the cost and scale of redundancies. Do we have any idea of the cost and the scale of the redundancies yet, and which council will bear the costs and how will they be apportioned? Take it back.
I can simply answer the first one with no. We don't know what the scale of that is. We haven't been through service reviews. How it's going to be proportioned, it's been identified that the starting point is going to be a 50-50 split on those costs.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. That's the question. Any other members indicating? Councillor Mrs Gadsden.
Got a question. I would just like to pass on my congratulations to the officers that took part and raised, I think it was £12,000 in the Free Peaks Challenge, and I think the whole committee would like to congratulate them on their work and their charity efforts.
And members.
And
Sorry,
member.
Thank you. No one else is indicating. I've just got a couple of questions, if I may. The first one relates to paragraph 7.1 in the report. And we haven't spent all of the budget as planned. And my question is, if we haven't spent the budget, are we behind on something?
No, we're not behind. It is where it should be, and we're planning, obviously, there's another 6 months left, 7 months left of the calendar year. So we're not behind on anything. We're working through all the scenarios. There is still work to go through for this year.
Okay, lovely, thanks. And my final point is, if you've got your microscopes ready, on Appendix 1, which is page 6.7, there's obviously a change of senior responsible owner, and I just want to check, did you have a formal handover when you took over?
So yeah, and actually ongoing with the person that originally had this. So with the original strategic director, which was Angela Hutchins, I had a number of meetings with her, and there is also a consultant, Angela Hogg, who I'm also working with, who set some of the governance up. So there has been that formal handover, as there should be with all the roles that are going through.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, no one else is indicating. We do have one recommendation, which was to investigate the use of existing staff to upskill the new staff. So I'll put that to, do you want me to read that again? Just to make doubly sure. Investigate the use of existing staff to upskill new staff. And that was...
Slightly different.
Oh, sorry.
Investigate existing staff can be upskilled.
Oh, right, sorry, yeah.
Roles.
Yeah, sorry. To investigate existing staff can be upskilled for the outstanding roles. Absolutely clear? Okay. Members, those in favour of that recommendation? Okay, thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you, Greg. If you want to
You sure?
leave, yep, you're absolutely, yeah.
Sorry.
Would impact on the budget. There'd have to be an increase in the training budget for that, would there not?
It depends how it turns out,
Yeah.
but there could be, but potentially a saving as well.
Yeah.
So I think it could work both ways, but certainly we'll investigate it.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Newport. Yeah.
Chairman, Councillor Milne was making a recommendation earlier, and I thought we would probably pause so that he could give you the recommendation, because I don't see how his recommendation can be put in later once the committee's closed.
Do you want to make the recommendation tonight, Councillor Milne?
Yes, all it is that we adopt a smart process of logging the various issues, because this is a complex multiple work stream project really, and issues will come up, and as we're going to eventually be reviewing it, because we're in at the scrutiny end of the minute, otherwise if we don't do that, then we've got, it's almost like a log of where we're at, and then we can make use of it later on and just make sure we haven't missed anything that actually comes back to bite us later. You know, that's all. So the recommendation is we use a SMART objectives methodology, because this is a new committee and we're looking at how we deal with scrutiny through to review, and that's all it is really.
Yeah. So can I just clarify that? So we adopt a SMART objectives methodology as for a process to log the issues as they occur.
Yeah, and the issues that are concerns to the councillors, and then we get the responses, so we know at a later date that we've dealt with it, because it's complex, it's not just one simple thing.
Yeah. So again, can I put words into it? So it's log them and track them. Is that?
Yeah, log and track.
Log and track.
Yeah. So we can use it in review later. That's all it is really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Councillor Wilkinson.
As I originally had one question, we've got two now. So first of all, I wanted to make sure that is that feasible, would that work, before we agree to something. But my second question is, I may have misunderstood you, Bob. My understanding of SMART objectives is around that it's an objective. So in other words, you are setting milestones where you want to achieve, as opposed to dealing with issues. Now, it may be that the SMART environment can be dealt with used for lots of different scenarios. I've only ever known it for objectives rather than dealing with issues. So is that an appropriate use of a SMART objective for this?
Problem-solving approach. Basically, we've raised something, we're worried about something, what's the answer? And that is it really. It's because if you look at the risk assessment sheet, in part that covers that. But then members will think of other things, and later on when we come to review, we're just looking at this work stream, because it's got many different strings to it. It's just to use that, just to log it really. I don't know if SMART would be the right term to use really, because I use those, you know, the boss wanted to know how far you've got with something, that kind of thing. But it's really to do with the fact that we're covering it later, and when we come to review this, which could be a year away or more, we could then say, well, we did look at this, we did cover that, we did get an answer on this, because there's a lot of things here. And that's it really. Yeah.
So I just want to be absolutely clear, because I'm going to make a recommendation. So it's about the logging and tracking of issues, and then when we've got them, then we work with them in a smart way. But I accept Councillor Wilkinson's point. Is that feasible to set up this logging and tracking system?
Certainly in a project management world, you usually do track and log issues and make sure that you resolve them or what's happened to them. So in that manner, yes, we can set up an issues log and make sure we do track them and we do resolve them, so there is a history of them as we move forward, and we can reflect and review them as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. And does that answer your point, Councillor Wilkinson, about feasibility?
Yes, it does. I've still got a question mark in my head around the use of them for dealing with issues, because if the suggestion was maybe that say for example you were looking at an aspect of the project, you said, right, we want to achieve this, 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 and this. You set up then SMART objectives to achieve this, 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 and this, and they're measurable and they're and everything else, achievable and everything. Yes. My understanding of what Councillor Milne is saying is that what we're going to do is we're going to deal with your tracking of your objectives the way that you're planning to do it. As and when issues arise, that's when the SMART objectives come in, which seems to be sort of counterintuitive to me. But maybe that's just me. If you think that can work, then I'll defer to your professionalism in that area.
No, I mean, no, I think the use of SMART against issues may be difficult, if I'm honest, but I think it's more the tracking, logging, and how we deal with them, and making sure that's very transparent and everyone can see that. Is that?
That's it. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Mm?
Yeah, that's definitely, we can do that.
We just had an element of that if there was a problem, and then that would just be part of it really. Not
per-
strict classical sense.
That's the perfect word. Thank you, Sonia. She's found the mot juste, the absolute right. So, Councillor Milne, does this reflect your recommendation? To adopt an appropriate methodology to log and track issues that pose risks for the council.
Yeah.
Okay, members, I'll read that out again. To adopt an appropriate methodology to log and track issues that pose risks for the council. Those members in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. You're free to go now.
This evening, meeting.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, members, to agenda item 7, which is the health check review of the asset delivery programme. Before I invite Councillor Webb and Matt Harwell-White to speak on it, what I would say is that this is quite unusual. We didn't commission this report. This report was produced for the senior responsible owner, which is Matt Harwell-White. So with that in mind, we didn't conduct the review. So what we're not trying to do is second guess the review, but we are to look at the recommendations that are in the report and, where necessary, amplify them or clarify or make recommendations. Okay, thank you. So who wants to go first? Councillor Webb?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So good evening, members. Just going to give you a brief summary of the report, if that's okay. Yep. So as has been said, we agreed to this report. We commissioned it. I believe we were proactive in doing so. I feel that it is a balanced report. It points out some good work as well as making recommendations which are valid. I welcome the opportunity to discuss it and welcome your views on it. This is the second health check that we have carried out. All the recommendations from the first report were implemented. It would help if the microphone to... Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. So this is the second health check that we have carried out. All the recommendations from the first report were implemented and they're outlined in Appendix C. And we can be confident that we are following the correct procedures. Just a few positives to draw your attention to. In Section 1, page 6, it states the development of the outline business case for the ADP had been progressed in exemplary fashion. The strategic outline case was issued in August 2018 and the OBC was approved by the Council's Investment Board in January 2019. The full business case was approved by the Council in May 2020. We followed correct procedure using exemplary project management principles. And then in Section 3 on page 9 of the report, I think quite a key section just to read out to you as well. Doing nothing is not an option, and many interviewees and stakeholders recognise this. The Council remains in a position where it has too much space whilst occupying an ageing portfolio of assets with leisure and community assets that remain financially unviable. Changes because of the COVID-19 pandemic have worsened the current position and strengthened the case for change. The Council aspires to operate in a more agile manner. However, this is not possible in the current facilities without some form of intervention. And just to go through briefly the recommendations, if that's okay, Chair, then I'll open it up. In terms of the recommendations raised, the first one, I believe we did engage stakeholders at the height of COVID, which had obviously limitations to it, and we do need to re-establish stakeholder trust. It was not a perfect process, and we recognise that. However, we were hindered in what we could do and need to progress now. Page 6 of the report outlines what we did, which, as you read it there, actually was quite a lot, including posting frequently asked questions on the Council's website, hosting virtual one-to-one meetings, placing adverts in the local press, creating a dedicated website and completing telephone appointments. However, despite this, the review team found wide acceptance that because a great deal of engagement took place during the height of COVID-19, too much emphasis was placed on online methods with too little in-person messaging. As a result, the quality of stakeholder engagement was severely compromised and some stakeholders felt excluded from the consultation process. In effect, we were living during a pandemic and our messages got lost amongst an awful lot of other messages that were going out. So I do believe we did what we could during a difficult period However, we also need to rebuild some of those links. In terms of the second point, yes, there is a need to recast the vision. We have seen significant changes since the ADP process began. I don't believe any of these could be foreseen, but do now need to be considered as part of this recasting. These issues are primarily, the first one, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Council now aspires to operate in a more agile manner. Since COVID, many employees now work from home, and demands for office space are expected to continue to be lower in the future, and certainly previous assumptions of office occupancy need to be revised to take this into account. And this is not possible in the current facilities without some form of intervention. Indeed, a large part of the building portfolio is no longer needed. The second significant change has been the cost of building work has gone up significantly. One business manager recently said to me that raw materials have now doubled in price. So we are being affected very specifically by what's been termed the cost of living crisis. I think it's more than that. It's the cost of building materials that's going to have a significant impact on us. I think we're worth bearing in mind the original ADP, including the works on the mill, is going to cost us approximately 1.5 million. The actual construction costs now, I'm guessing, I know, would be substantially higher. And then finally, the proposed partnership with Brentwood Borough Council will result in economies of scale and greater resilience. But again, that's going to add changes to the programme going forward. However, this still strengthens the case for change, and as the report outlined, doing nothing is not an option. In terms of the third point, I believe the partnership panel did have a role. It certainly helped in terms of the planning of the buildings and had a key role in making recommendations to the board, and crucial role in shaping the final designs. However, as we've done previously, we will reflect on the terms of reference of the partnership panel and update that group as needed. In terms of point 4, I'd simply say we don't want to lose any of our excellent officers, and I'd certainly want to recognise the fantastic and significant contribution made by them and to thank them for that. I think we underestimate the value of our officers sometimes, and I certainly want to thank them for all their hard work. And then finally, in point 5, we do need time to rebuild the vision. Whilst recognising that doing nothing is not an option, this is not a start again, but a time of pause and reflect. In terms of recasting the vision, there will be discussions that take place with directors, with the Chief Executive, fellow council colleagues, and we certainly look to come back to full council by the end of the year with an updated outline business case, which will then go for a final stop-go decision by full council. And we're certainly working towards the time frame suggested in the report, which is approximately 3 months. So in summary, I do agree with the recommendations. I'll take any comments on board from this group and consider them and take them forward. We do recognise that things can improve, and the stakeholder engagement being one of them. And in terms of the vision, that does need to be recasted and remodelled, moving forward to that final stop-go decision at full council has been previously agreed. So happy to listen to comments or suggestions on the report. I don't know, Matt, if you want to chip in with anything.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Evening, members. Excuse me. Councillor Webb's given a very thorough update and has covered all the points I was going to make. Thank you, Chairman. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gooding.
Good evening. Thank you, Councillor Webb, for that review there. That was covered quite well. Just a minor thing that I was concerned about. Does the review take on board the changes for the Millhall and Freight as far as the carbon footprint goes, with any refurbishment and environmental changes that will take place? And the policies will obviously be updated accordingly, I would expect.
So as a council, we are working towards being carbon neutral. That's an ambition. It's an ambitious target. It's one we're doing our best to meet. And certainly as the ADP goes forward, I don't want to lose sight of that.
Can I just come back on that, Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to make a recommendation that throughout the asset delivery programme, consideration of impact of our carbon footprint be given when buying in any services, etc.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yep. Okay. I'll just get that down.
Carbon footprint, yeah?
Yeah. mic's on, yeah? Okay, so members, the recommendation is that going forward with the ADP, consideration of the impact of our carbon footprint be given when buying in any services. Is that the recommend? Okay, I'll move that from the chair. Sorry.
Chairman, may I add procurement as well?
So buying any service and procurement, yeah. And procurement of goods.
Yeah.
Yeah. You happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so just one more time. Going forward with the ADP, consideration of the impact of our carbon footprint be given when buying in any services or procurement of goods. So I'll move that from the chair. Those members in favour? Okay. Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, so that is carried. Thank you, members. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, if I may. The first, the point about the engagement, I think it's generally accepted the fact that it was very difficult under the circumstances to engage with everybody. So that is taken on board. I think there is another issue which shouldn't be lost, and hopefully moving forward it will be remembered, which was also the timing of the engagement as well. So hopefully, I know the mill hall's out of it now, thankfully, but certainly with the rest of the project, I would hope that obviously public engagement, stakeholder engagement is done at the appropriate time. The other thing was, I was a little bit surprised at the timescale that Councillor Webb has mentioned about being able to come to full council in 3 months, because I'm very aware of, having read the reports, they've quite rightly identified some huge changes in working practice since the first OBC was done. So I was talking to Matt about this before the meeting. I'm not suggesting we're going back to square one, because we're not. We all accept we have to move from South Street because it's not fit for purpose. But we are nowhere near where we were 3 years ago, or however many years ago it was that this OBC was first done. So there's a lot of work to do there. And also there's a lot of concern, certainly within the members of the partnership panel, the last meeting we had, around the building costs and the gap between the revenue income from South Street and the building costs for the Freight House, which seem to be growing exponentially day by day. So I'm just a little bit surprised, I should say, that you're looking at 3 months. So is that the case, or do you think there's... are you going to be going straight back to ground zero and starting again, or are you just going to start just rechurning the numbers?
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Yeah, really useful question, thank you. I think it's a challenge. That's a challenging timescale. I'll say it very clearly, it is. That's a challenge. But we need to work out pace with this programme. I think we're at a point now where we have the report sets out some really useful challenges to us in terms of those three key areas they've flagged. Inflation, the partnership with Brentwood, and obviously the impacts of COVID. So I think what the report sets out is it's not a back to the drawing board approach, it's a review of the principles of the OBC. We've added value to our sites by securing planning, so we've added value to those sites. The question is now around, in terms of the Freight House, what does that look like? Do we need to review that in terms of the principles behind that? I think on that basis, I think it can be achieved, although it will be challenging. So I think it's a review of the principles rather than the entire strategic case. The strategic case for change has been strengthened. I think the report says that. I think that's what it sets out. So that case is there to achieve a form of the ADP. It's what it finally looks like, I think, is the challenge. But I think on principle terms, I think it's achievable, but yeah, it will be challenging.
Just come back, Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
Thank you. Forgive me for my lack of knowledge here. Does the outline business case, will that include costings, or is that the financial business case that comes afterwards? Because I'm just concerned, that's where my concern lies, actually. It's not the principle of what we're trying to achieve here. I think we will agree, and I agree with you. I think the case is strengthened. It is the costings of the Freight House that gives me great concern, which is why I was surprised with the timescale you mentioned. So is that going to be included in that, or was that a completely different piece of work?
So the OBC would give you indicative figures. The key bit of the OBC would be to review those strategic drivers of the case for change. And then if the figures change as a result of that, we highlight those. But it would need, yes, an FBC, a final business case, to reach that as well. But that can be an FBC can be relatively light touch. All we're doing is confirming any movement in the numbers from the OBC to the FBC. And because of the pace of working out, that could be relatively straightforward. But it's the case for change we need to consider, and the principles behind that. That's the key piece of work to do next.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, Matt, just refresh me on this, because I thought there was a stop-go point in October. Am I incorrect?
We haven't, there is a stop-go decision to be taken.
Yeah.
We haven't set a date on
We
that.
didn't have a date, okay.
No.
So you mentioned earlier that obviously doing this at OBC and you know, building costs and all of that. But how do you take into account the danger sat behind the doors of number 10 and the cuts to public finances and cuts possibly to our budget as a whole? Would that come in at the OBC, or would that come in later on? Because we could find ourselves in with a huge budget deficit or budget gap.
I think, Chair, I think that goes back to the case for change. I think there are risks to any programmes, any development programmes. I think we also would review the risks of not doing it in terms of the case for change. The programme is brought forward because there were an opportunity to regenerate some of our spaces, but also deliver financial efficiencies. So that was one of the key drivers. It was around those efficiencies. So certainly that's part of the case for change in terms of leading the project, and that still remains. But we'll have to review those efficiencies in light of the building costs now, but also the opportunity savings in terms of the cost of operating our current estate, which as the report sets out is too large, some surplus assets. The opportunity is there to still deliver those savings across those buildings.
Could I sort of help out a bit, because I've got experience of this sort of thing. It's not possible for the council to second guess what the Treasury may or may not do. So in effect what we have to do is march to the latest order, what we know as of today. So we would make our plans, I hope I'm not putting words into it, but we would make our plans on what we know today, and if at some time in the future the budget gets slashed, then that would be affected, it would be reflected in the business case.
Chair, that's correct. It's always a point in time, but I think the point I make is we entered into this because we were delivering efficiencies and savings for the council and for the taxpayer, so that still remains the case. Any new OBC and FBC would have to reconsider those numbers, but the case for doing a programme right back at the start was we have surplus assets, we can regenerate our spaces and deliver savings, and that still remains the case today.
And again, I don't want to put words into Councillor Mr Newport's mouth, but are you alluding to affordability? I think that we've got the money today, but and I think I don't think we can second guess that. But it would be reflected in the business case if that were to change. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Chair. Reading through the report, I agree with all the conclusions and that. I think the one thing I would point out is my utter frustration. Reference on the recommendation 2. Back in 2019, when we had the very last investment board meeting, I brought the news from the industry at point to say that big office programmes are being paused because they are aware that there is going to be a change in working practices as a result of what was happening with COVID. If you remember, that last meeting was the very last meeting that Council had face-to-face because COVID had actually hit us at that particular point in time. Now, my frustration from that is basically because I brought something which was not my own opinion. It was something that came from the trade, straight from the point, very high up in the trade, and it wasn't even given the time to discuss, and I don't even think it's actually been noted in the minutes. We would have saved ourselves an absolute fortune as a council if that information had been at least looked into at the time. So what I'd like to actually say, just as a conclusion, is to say that if we do get any information which comes from the trade in this going forward, that we do actually investigate it going forward rather than just gloss over it and basically take no notice of it. It's just, from my point of view, it's just an utter frustration. But I do see that the recommendations in here, I go totally with them. Thank you.
So I do wonder, is there a lessons learned log that we've got ongoing?
May I, if not, recommend it?
Chair, there's certainly a risk register, as you'd imagine, with key risks identified. That's actually one of the recommendations, to more regularly review that risk register. And so that's being refreshed as we speak. And certainly lessons are learned and collated from that risk register for Health Chairman.
Sorry, yeah, Councillor Mrs McPherson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's really just coming on the back of what Councillor Eves mentioned. Is that included, and can we see that risk register perhaps here at Overview and Scrutiny if fellow members would like to see that?
Chairman, very happy to share that. It's been reported to members on previous occasions through various ADP updates, but happy to share that again.
Thank you. Councillor Constable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whilst I understand a lot of the other councillors' reservations about rushing into things, the longer this evaluation takes to complete, the higher our costs will be in maintaining the existing buildings, the higher the build costs are going to be. So I fully agree that 3 months is a good timescale to come back to, and obviously if it takes longer, then they can come back to us and say, yes, we need a bit more time. But to have a 3-month timescale is quite a good thing, because it focuses people's minds. And you know, that's going to be towards the winter period, and there's a cost of heating all those buildings and looking after them and maintaining them until such a time we hand them over to the builders.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks. Any other points? Okay, can I ask a question? Because I've got a, particularly, it refers to recommendations 2 and 4, and I've got a lot of experience in projects. I've never seen a project with such a massive change, things like COVID and inflation running away. So those are all things that you couldn't reasonably predict. But what I want to do is amplify the recommendation, really, is that, and it picks up on something that Councillor Wilkinson said, will we be resetting the baseline back to 0? In other words, where we are today? So, and will we be looking at options that may have been discarded in the past but actually might now be relevant? What I don't want to do is I don't want the past to necessarily influence the future solutions you might come up with.
We've got a chance now to pause and reflect. Previous things that have been looked at and discounted, we can look at again. In terms of the time frame, maybe 3 months isn't quite realistic, but I don't want this to be hanging around in 12, 24 months' time. We've got pressing need to do something with our workforce, and I think the plan is very clear on that. So it's not a case of starting again, but it is a case of building on what's gone before, but recasting that vision into maybe something that's slightly different.
Okay, thank you. I've actually got a recommendation that I'd like to move from the chair, and it's that the executive ensure that the programme continues to be vision-led and that all options will be evaluated regardless of whether they were part of the original business case. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Okay, members, I'll read it out again. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Just mind just repeating that recommendation point, please, just so I've got that. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's the recommendation that the executive ensure that the programme continues to be vision-led and that all options will be evaluated regardless of whether they were part of the original outline business case. So, in other words, if there was something that wasn't appropriate when we looked at the original, that might be appropriate now, or something that we thought was appropriate but isn't now, it's to make sure we're not being guided by history, as it were.
Understood. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for clarifying. My concern with that would be that sounds more like what you call a strategic outline case. So that is going right back to the beginning, looking at the long list of options, which could include things we have discussed in the past and discarded. What the report's talking about is a recast of the OBC, so the principles in that OBC, our ways of working, the impact of COVID, the impact of inflation, the impact of the partnership and the opportunity of the partnership, rather than going back to basis of a long list. that would certainly take longer. It can be done, but it will be take longer because you're going back to basics and strategic principles at that point. Just to fact,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. All I was thinking was that some things that you might have discarded, you could just say they're still no longer relevant. I wouldn't expect it to be a lot of work. It would still be at a very high level. And I don't know what those options are. So I'm not trying to second guess them. It's just to make sure that we don't discount something now that we thought was no good but actually might be useful, and vice versa.
Chairman, it can certainly be done. We can review a strategic outline case as part of that work. It just may require a little bit longer, a bit more engagement. I'm happy to take that away, Chairman. I think it can be done. Absolutely happy with that.
Okay, thanks. So I'll read that out again and then I'll move it from the chair. So the recommendation is that the executive ensure that the programme continues to be vision-led and that all options will be evaluated regardless of whether they were part of the original outline business case. Those in favour? Okay. Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that is carried by majority. Okay, and we've got one other recommendation from Councillor Mrs McPherson.
Thank you. Sorry, committee, we didn't actually vote on this. So the recommendation, following on from the conversation with Councillor Eves, the recommendation that the risk register or lessons learned log is presented to this committee.
I'll move that from the chair. Those in favour? Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor, Mr. Holwood-White, if you want to go, you're welcome to stay.
Did they all find out?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, sorry, Matt, you might have to stay a little bit longer. I saw something in here about tensions between the ADB partnership and GB partnership. Can you enlarge on that, and have they been resolved?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. The tensions related to the planning process in terms of some of our statutory consultees and the process that GB went through to achieve planning for disposal sites. It was a tough process, as it should be, with the LPA, a robust process. All the sites achieved planning, but yeah, it was a tough process that we went through. High engagement, a high level of scrutiny, as it should be for a council disposed site in a conservation area of listed buildings, but it was a challenging process.
Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, we've got two recommendations on the report. That the health check review of the asset delivery programme recommendations contained therein. So we've noted those. Okay. And then that the committee makes any recommendations to the executive for consideration, and we've taken those and voted on those as well. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item 8. Before I do this, I'd like to thank Councillor Milne and Councillor Eves for their work on producing this report for the committee. So I would like whoever, you can do it as a double act or you can do it if you've got a spokesman, but would you give us an overview of the report, please?
With pleasure, Chairman.
I don't think your mic's on.
No, is that better?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I have to say it's to RDC's credit, actually, that when we looked into writing this report, that they've embraced the statutory guidance and overview of scrutiny as laid out by the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. And Angela Hutchins took the steps of inviting the Centre for Governance and Security to carry out an evaluation. And they produced in their final letter a number of recommendations, and I've listed these in section 1. But the gist of it is, it's a refresh of the review committee, providing clarity of scrutiny's functions, and it enables us to engage more fully on policy and key decisions in a constructive framework. It is challenging as well. So, and also gets us a better engagement with the executive and better preparation for these meetings, because there are pre-meetings that were arranged that outline what the issues are. And we've got a classic example with questions tonight, which has been passed around. So that side of it, and the investment by RDC in training has been quite significant. So we'd like to thank the RDC and the executive for actually supplying that for us. What we are on is, of course, a learning curve, and this is where we look at the progress of the committee. Since we were formed and the title was changed, we have responded to the methodology of scrutiny and overview. But we've also now learnt through a list of various work streams we've had in our work programme that we can join an existing issue, such as Treasury management and so on. It's always ongoing. We look at where we're at and we join in and look at that position, and then we're then in a position to review that later on. But we've also got completely brand new strategies, like the litter strategy. So we're able to look at that as it's planned, and then we're able to now review that later on when we've seen how it's gone through. So, and the One Team Transformation Programme. And tonight we've seen an example. I think it's a big advantage and advance on the review committee process. And I'd like to thank Councillor Eves because it is a cross-party report and we're a cross-party committee. So from that point of view, all of that is good. So at the moment, in the conclusion of the report, we have responded to overview and scrutiny guidance from the Ministry of Housing and local government. We've invested in training. We are engaging and actually developing processes, the way we deal with things, and we have got a better engagement with the executive, there's no doubt about that, and the officers. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, because you're quite a good organiser, I have to tell you. And I'd like to thank Angela Hutchins, who actually got the ball rolling here as well. I understand she's moved on, or has she moved? Yeah, she has moved on now. Yeah. Anyway, that's it really. It is a joint report. It just says where we're at, and you know, and we are covering all of the issues in the recommendations from the report that Angela commissioned.
Okay, thank you. Well, once again, thank you to both of you for doing it, for volunteering, which is. Yeah, don't know about that. Okay, members, has anyone got any questions for Councillor Milne or Councillor Eves?
Nobody's indicating to.
Okay, so members, is the report noted?
Agreed, sir.
Okay, thank you. We move on to item 9, which is the key decisions document. And if we look at the key decisions document, there are 3 that have been announced today, 3 key decisions that have been published. So we've got on page 2 of the report, the Environmental Health Service Plan. We've got the... So
that was done a couple of weeks ago. That's done previously.
what we do later. Yeah, the Modern Slavery Act will be done later.
No, it's been done. It's been done earlier.
Oh, it's been done earlier, sorry, yep. And then we've got the car parking, which is always a favourite, which was announced today. And then the final one that we'll have on the list for the next meeting will be the voluntary sector grant allocations. So those are out there if anyone needs to call them in or feels they need to call in any of those decisions. You've got to let me know within 3 days, I think it is. 5. There you are, inflation. Any questions on the key decision document, members? Okay, thank you. Moving on to the final item, which is our work plan. And before I say too much, well, before we go through it in detail, those of you that attended the training that was given last month will remember that the work plan is a living document, so it's not tying us in stone. So items can come in and out of the plan, and we can amend the sequence of what goes on. And one thing I would ask is that if members wish to bring an item onto the plan and it requires a member working group, that you, if you're not going to do it yourself, that you've got someone lined up to do it, because it's actually quite difficult to get volunteers to do some of the work. And I understand people are busy, but if we're bringing work on, there is also a resource implication for us. Councillor Newport, you're indicating. Do you want to speak before we go through the plan, or...?
Yeah, only to, thank Chairman, just to remind you of the request to add an additional item on Gypsy and Travellers policy and position, and the application of evidence and policy.
Yeah. And I agree with that. Will you be able to supply any resources for that?
In terms of what, sorry?
Helping to look at the Gypsy and Traveller. How do you envisage it working? Do you envisage a report from the officers?
Yeah, a report from the officers.
Okay, yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you meant...
no, a report from Phil Drain, I
Yeah.
think, is appropriate. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And, yeah, Councillor Mrs McPherson.
It's just a question through you, Chair, to Councillor Mr Newport. Councillor Mr Wilkinson and myself have just put some questions to officers on enforcement, so that we can then start to have a background to ask them to bring something forward here, if necessary. Is it worth you putting some questions to the officer first around the policy? It's only a thought.
The officers had many questions already that are unanswered, so we just need the report from the officer, and I think the officer is expecting to produce that report on Gypsy and Travellers anyway already. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No one else has indicated, so we'll go through the plan then, and we'll look forward. So the 7th of November, we've got the RIPA coming up, especially for Councillor Constable, the review of the Regulatory and Investigatory Powers Act. And that's statutory, so we have to review that, whether we like it or not. We've got the... we've got this as a provisional, which is a report of the Task and Finish Group on the review of the terms of reference of the Flood Forum. And I've got some volunteers who are prepared to undertake that work, and I'm hoping, without being a hostage to fortune, that it's going to be a relatively straightforward piece of work, which is reviewing the documentation and then making recommendations where necessary. In December, we got the Treasury Management mid-year review, again, which is statutory. And then I'm looking to the Vice Chair and Councillor Wilkinson, who are undertaking this work. We've got a report on the Task and Finish Group of Planning Enforcement. Does that look achievable?
I think we're on time for that.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Are you expecting, or would you like, a report similar to the one that Councillor Mill and Councillor Reeves did?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sonia one answered for you.
I was going to say, if you ask member services, they'll be able to support, to get it in topped and tailed. January, we've got the update. We've asked for an update from the portfolio holder for climate and economy on the carbon neutral 2030. And then there is a Task and Finish group, which I've volunteered to lead, on planning processes and procedures. So I'm pretty confident that we can meet that date, because to kick it off, I've got a meeting with Phil Vane on next week or the week after. so that should be okay. 1st of February, we've got the Treasury Management Strategy. That's the annual investment strategy and minimum revenue provision policy statement, which I guess in the current climate will probably be quite interesting. We've been asked by a member to have an update on the South Essex parking partnership. This has come out, there's been concerns with residents about parking, etc. So what we thought was, having learned from the training that we can call these people in, we'll get them in and we'll run through with them. So they are booked for that date, I believe, they're confirmed. And 1st of March, we've got the Community Safety Partnership. And again, this is something that we do annually, but if those of you that were here last year will recall that we got the Chief Inspector in and poor lady got a real grilling, but actually the Community Safety Partnership is much more than that. So what we're looking to do is get other agencies in as well. It's not just an action on the police. And then the 4th of April, we've got the annual report. Councillor Mr Newport.
Chairman, as a part of the Community Safety Partnership review, and you were just saying about, we get the local policing team inspectorate.
Yeah.
I think it might be prudent to bring in the Police Fire Crime Commissioner as well for that, if we can get him in, because I think there's a lot of issues that we face that, we'd like to speak to him about as well.
Yes, I think there's nothing wrong with us asking for that at all. So, I'll take that as an action to request the Police and Crime Commissioner to attend, which I think would be useful.
Well, he's also the fire brigade.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Councillor Mrs McPherson.
I'm not opposed to the PFCC being asked to come to that meeting, but don't forget his role is strategic. It would be better, I feel, to have representation from the fire service and the police individually, as they're both statutory members of the CSP, but perhaps the PFCC can come back and tell us. Health is also, and also probation members of the CSP, along with obviously ourselves. I know in previous years we've questioned the joint partnership as well and issues around that. Councillor Wilkinson's got his hand up.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Wilkinson.
I certainly don't want to come back and contradict Councillor McPherson at all, because she's exactly right, it is more strategic. However, what I would say is that they are very much led by the direction of the PFCC when it comes to priorities. And I think we had Cathy Calder here last year, the inspector, who's talked about her, her ability or inability at times to be able to prioritise certain things. That comes from the top.
Yeah.
So, we're asking the wrong person in a sense, really. But I do take your point that, they are statutory people. But I would agree with what Councillor Newport says in relation to the PFCC.
I don't think there's any harm in asking if he's available, and he wishes to come down, he can do. We've got some items that are scheduled for this year. We've got the review of the Constitution, which is ongoing. And then there's one that's come up from the previous year. Members that were on the committee last year remember that we had a members' task and finish group which was reporting on the management of public open spaces. And if you'll recall, the report was given verbally, and so there was a recommendation made which was lost. But I've been approached by a member to say, well, rather than lose this work, can we bring it back in and have it as a written report? So I've asked Councillor Mrs Mason, who was the leading the work, if she can contact member services so that they can format it in the right format, and then we can re-vote on the recommendations, so we don't lose that. Okay. So that concludes. Oh, sorry. Councillor Mrs Gooding.
Just one other thing regarding the health update. We have funding that is ring-fenced for our health and NHS, and I wonder if it would be appropriate perhaps to to approach them to come in. We have had CCG in the past, and obviously the names move on, but the bodies stay the same.
Yeah, so we'd just be looking for an update from them of where, yeah, okay. If we can take that as an action, please, to contact CCG to bring them in.
DG
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
What is it like?
Okay. No other members are indicating, so that is the final item of business. Yes, or before I actually close the meeting, we've got a training session next Monday. So and if you can attend, I appreciate people's diaries. You may not be able to attend, but the training that we've had from these people is really good. It's really worth getting to if you can. I mean, I think just a straw poll, members that attended, did you find it useful last time? Yeah, so if you can attend, I strongly urge you to. So thank you. Oh, Councillor Newport.
Do you think it may be possible, because I've got another meeting to attend, but that we could get even an audio recording of the training session and the slides to go with it? Because it does follow on from the last session, which was worthwhile. So.
Yeah, we should be able to. Yeah, I mean, even if we can only rewind, I think the focus would be on the trainer. So what the trainer's got to say, and if we can, we'll get members' questions in as well. So, yeah, sorry, and Councillor Wilkinson.
So just one thing, Chair. I did mention this after the training session last time when I spoke to you.
Yeah.
That whether we should all have a bit of a get together at some time. Whether we had I mean, I know a work plan is quite full. But there was so much useful information and there's so much to digest. I think that it would be worth us all sitting down and just discussing it rather than just bomb bursting and never talking about it again. So
Yeah.
I don't know what we can do.
And I agree. And it's not that I didn't try and do it, but
You just
unfortunately,
ignored me.
No, I didn't ignore you. Her Majesty the Queen died, and so everything was then put on hold. So I hadn't forgotten about it. What I actually wanted to do was, because the other training we would have done both sets of training in short order, and then had the meeting. So I think it's a really good thing to do. I absolutely agree, because speaking to members in the margins afterwards, everyone said, "Oh, what about this? What about that?" I was speaking to Councillor Newport. Have we thought about doing that? And same with Councillor Mrs. McPherson. So yes, I think that would be a really good thing if people can attend.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the back of what Councillor Mike Wilkinson just mentioned, perhaps we could also look at some succession planning, because this committee changes from year to year. Some of us have been on here for years, some haven't, but it would be good to have some sort of substance to the committee moving forward that we can keep there when we've gained all this training. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take an action to write to group leaders just to float that as an idea. I can't mandate it, but I can float the idea. Okay. Okay, so that concludes the business.
Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry. Sorry, my apologies. Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification. Are there likely, or is it intended to have any pre-meetings to this future work programme?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
for each one?
Yeah, so what we do is before each meeting, we schedule a Zoom call or a Teams meeting. And the idea is that people get together, we look at the areas of concern and make sure that we're not doubling up on any questions that we may have. And in advance, perhaps come up with, think of potential recommendations as well. But we do, you should get, did you get a...
I didn't.
Oh, right.
I'm sorry, Chair, through you. I think, Councillor Sharp, are you a substitute member?
No. Full member.
Right, then yes, you should have been on the Zoom.
I don't think I was invited. Yeah.
But that is one point for members to remember to pass on to your substitute member if you're not coming, the invite to the pre-meet.
Councillor Reeves, yeah.
Thank you. Just a small point, following on from Councillor Newport's issues about diary. I did say I was coming, but unfortunately it clashed with planning training. And so, I mean, it's one of those sort of things I would really implore officers to, when they're booking these things, to look at their diaries and try not to overlap.
Yeah, in fairness, and because of the schedule of when this meeting takes place, we try and do it the week before. And there were a number of clashes, and to be fair to Sonia, she did identify that. And so what we ended up doing was taking the decision, the one that affected the least number of people, as it were, because people had different meetings with different committees and that sort of thing. So there's never going to be a perfect solution to this. And all I would say, if you've got any issues or observations or recommendations to make, you can always give me a call or drop me an email, because then I can start forwarding those on. But yeah, it's not that we don't want people there. Unfortunately, sometimes it's, yeah.
It was unprecedented because we had to reschedule meetings because of the
Yeah. Oh, and Sonia's right. The other thing is that when Her Majesty passed away, meetings had to be rescheduled as well. So that was another fly in the ointment. So, yeah, we are trying our best. It's not that we don't want you there, Adrian. Right, thank you, members. So that's the final piece of business. So the meeting is finished at 20:50. Thank you very much.